Thank you so much, everyone, and great to see all of you. We have a very interesting lineup. We have industry experts with me, so I'll probably try to be the one who just questions, and they are the ones who answers, right? So I think, given the topic at hand, and looking at cloud, looking at edge, right? So we have seen multifold in terms of how the entire foray has transformed. Looking at, again, I don't want to really explain edge, everyone knows about it, but looking at the whole set of transformation that it has enabled to do, right? As we move forward, we believe that in some pockets of spaces, there might be instances wherein edge is becoming more powerful. Thinking of, say, for example, we talk about edge devices, right? AI being embedded into them, they're becoming more powerful. So will there be a scenario in which probably edge would oversee cloud, specifically in some scenarios? So again, this question pointing to Bejoy, right? So what are your thoughts on that? Or what could be the new set of applications that would come up, right, and really drive edge forward?
First off, thank you, and happy to be here. It's good to see a great crowd in the afternoon. I'd say, first, the definition of edge itself. There's been a continuum where people have been defining, does the edge really sit at the device? Is it at the retail location? Is it within this building? So that definition is still a bit flaky, I would say. But same time, it's going to depend really on the use case. It was interesting that right before this panel, there was the enterprise survey that showed you're going to have these three different categories, which is revenue generation, efficiency, and transformation, right? So if you look at it from that perspective, and see what use cases could tie it towards revenue generation and where edge could play a role. So take for something, as an example, something for low latency. So today you have realizable use cases around gaming and XR, AR, VR kind of use cases, but in future it could be autonomous driving as an edge low latency use case. Same thing when you look at the efficiency angle. When you look at high bandwidth processing, rather than processing everything in the cloud, is there an opportunity to do some of it at the edge location? So that could be for medical imaging kind of use cases. Then there are transformative use cases as well as efficiency linked. For example, if you look at cases where there's intermittent connectivity. So a retail point of sale system going down, but you still want the operation to continue. So in that scenario, an edge-based service can be helpful. There's very critical services around security, which deals with financial and the healthcare sector. Now, again, going back to the revenue generating angle, you could have contextual services that are delivered using the edge. And finally, independent decision making, where if there's a connectivity that's lost to the central cloud, how could you still continue to operate? So that's also going to be an interesting angle. And finally, as was mentioned several times in the last presentation, sustainability angle. So how could you more efficiently process the data? And when you have a more distributed edge, the energy savings part of it is also going to be key. Now, that is the use case directive there. But at the same time, you still have a large use for the cloud as well, because there's centralized data management, there is centralized databases, and especially now with all the stock on Gen AI, the whole training aspect and learning aspect is going to be based in the cloud. Edge is going to be more around inferencing. You have new companies like, for example, Grok is gaining a lot of attention right now. NVIDIA is in the news more as a GPU, multi-purpose processor, but then something purely focused on a language processing, focused on text prediction, and inferencing associated with that could be more efficiently done at the edge. Especially when you're not dealing with very large language models, is still the concept of small and medium, which can be optimized for these retail kind of use cases. So I think, to answer your question directly, it's not going to be a yes or a no answer. It's really going to depend on the use case, and it's going to evolve over time, because the continuum definition of edge is also going to evolve over time.
Awesome. And I think there were very good examples of use cases, right, that you highlighted. And within the same thing, right, I think Anandh wanted to point out to you, right, a very targeted question, right? You have been in the business since a long time. I'm sure that you see a plethora of use cases already across industries. But again, if you kind of talk about the most impactful ones, right? So what have you seen companies or enterprises adopting, right? And where do you see the future in terms of the use cases, or maybe net new use cases coming up?
Sure. Thank you for having us here. And a pleasure. I think one of the most impactful use cases that I've seen is how healthcare companies are creating a digital twin of a patient, or not even a patient, right, of an individual, right, and monetizing out of it. to start with, as people, kind of get older, for example, people have pacemakers, right? So earlier, if you look at it, pacemakers, if you want to kind of get data out of a pacemaker, you need to go into a service provider, and he basically will get, there is still a small IoT device, and you can kind of download the data and they analyze how, things are performing. But now, as part of this digital twin concept, the pacemaker can talk to your phone, right? So the pacemaker talks to your phone. There are other devices that are across your body analyzing various parameters of your body, and all that gets to your phone. And phone is your edge device, right? So now, this can also prescribe certain things. For example, suddenly, let's say, assume that your blood pressure goes up. Suddenly, your blood sugar goes up. Now, it can immediately from the phone warn the individual that, hey, these are some things happening. You need to either go to a practitioner or you need to take this particular medicine, right? At the same time, this data is also fed into the cloud. Right, the entire data, 365 days, it is fed in the cloud, and somebody in the back end from the cloud is analyzing what is happening to this person, right? And every month, let's say you've signed up for a monthly review with your practitioner, he basically looks at it and changes your medicine, changes your way of life, changes your rather eating habits depending on what they are seeing, right? So these are right now extremely monetizing use cases, and when it comes to health, people are ready to spend any amount of money to ensure that they stay healthy. And these days, companies are investing in their senior leadership to subscribe to these use cases or subscribe to these services, so that they want to see their leadership very, very healthy, and it's becoming a very, very profitable industry. So that is use case number one. Use case number two, I would say, is in the agricultural space, right?
Okay.
So these days, it's all about hydroponic farms. I think that is right now becoming very, very prevalent in India, especially outside of Bangalore. There are lots of them. But again, if you look at it, in some of these farms, if you go to especially in the US, like thousands of acres of, multiple level farms, hardly you will see one or two guys inside that entire farm. Everything is automated. How do you automate? You have edge devices across these farms monitoring the health of each of those plants there. There are cameras looking at, hey, what each of those plants are doing. If there is a slight dimming in the color of the leaves, that's basically a trigger, and that triggers, hey, go back, figure out why it is, what is the prescription for that, which means you need more moisture, you need more chemicals, you need more whatever to kind of get into the soil or the water or the medium that it's growing, and that's automatically injected. And that way you're ensuring that whoever is taking it is getting the most nutritious vegetables or whatever else, right? Right, and that again, if you're using this technology, you're also increasing the value of what you're selling from an agriculture perspective. These are two use cases I felt was very, very impactful that I was part of in the past.
Okay.
Anand, you don't see a use case in the retail sector?
Yes, that's also right. Dynamic pricing.
From my standpoint, the use case that you mentioned, digital twin, is it realizable today versus is it something further out, right? Because I think the technology for digital twin creation is still evolving. From my perspective, I think the one that's monetizable right now that I see a lot of industries or across different industries, what is monetized, maybe you could speak to it from your company perspective as well, is around retailing and personalization, right? You walk into a retail location, there's a contextual ad that's pushed, or within the retail location itself, is there a play that using the edge location, you could actually mine some of the data and deliver services more closer to the end user, as opposed to the industrial sector. For me, I think the challenge there has been how fast are these devices able to evolve, because even when you think of 5G, the real monetizable use case has not really happened yet, because in the private sector, in the enterprise sector, you still have these legacy devices which are not migrated yet, right? So I agree with you that, in farmlands and agriculture, there is a lot of these sensors that are getting connected, but the real monetizable angle, the real use case, I think, is going to have to wait for 5G advanced, 6G kind of use cases in the future. But retail is something, just like content caching is an edge use case that's doable right now. I think these are some of the things that I'm seeing, at least from my perspective, being realized right now.
Yeah. And the other one is all the autonomous cars, right?
Yes.
Again, I think it's something for the future. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's still evolving, but yeah, we'll still get there. And I agree to your point, right? So I think monetization of 5G is something that's still not yet there, right? Network slicing and all those things, we are still to be evolved. But thanks for your inputs. So while we talk about this, right, we have talked about use cases, how they've evolved. I'm sure that there still requires a steady flow of data exchange between different systems, right, to make sure that the use case is kind of working optimally. So if I talk about this, I think we kind of look at various challenges, right, that exist for any sort of data or edge kind of workloads, right? So if I talk about challenges, maybe Binoy, I'll go back to you again, right? So anything that you see, right, from a challenge perspective that enterprises typically face while deploying edge kind of workloads?
Definitely. I mean, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is resource constraint, right? Because cloud gives you infinite ability to scale, versus at the edge, you're defined by what is the heterogeneity of the devices that's going to be at the edge. That's going to be one issue. The other big piece is, of course, the challenge with data consistency, because many of these use cases, you're going to have to sync between what is in the edge and the cloud. I mean, your example is as a use case perspective, right? So that's going to be a key challenge. And of course, when it comes to security, you would have a lot more use cases which are very specific to having to meet either HIPAA requirements in the healthcare sector or sector-specific requirements, which brings in security aspects and challenges there. I think the other one is the modularity and the management of these devices, especially in a heterogeneous environment. How do you manage all of this? But it's also going to create the opportunity for how you manage this more efficiently, be it through new algorithms that maybe it's defined for model compression when it comes to AI techniques, or how would you carry this data more efficiently between the edge and the cloud? So there is that challenge, but I think there's also opportunity for new technology. I'm sure, I mean, at least I'm privy to a few companies that are focused building solutions just for that angle, right? How do you address some of these challenges? But addressing the resource constraint as it deals with the edge, I think is the number one piece. The data consistency and federated data. Learning for those sort of techniques, it will evolve with time, but the resource constraint is going to be there. You can't, I mean, you're going to be limited by space and what you could deploy at the edge, and you have to work around it. And interestingly, just last month, NVIDIA acquired a company called Colon AI, which is focused on federated distributed learning. And the whole premise here is today, if you have GPUs, you're running in locations that's very power hungry, which is going to cost more. How do you focus and do it in a distributed environment? How could you train a large language model, which today happens in a central location with more of a distributed learning method and still for the same use case implemented, right? So I still see there's an opportunities even though there are challenges.
Awesome. And I believe that when there are challenges, there is scope for innovation as well, right? Ishu, again, coming to you, right? So I think we've talked about a lot of use cases, right? We've talked about some challenges, but I'm sure that at your end, right, you must kind of see some specific challenges or maybe inhibitors, right, that would prompt not to get it deployed right now or so, right? So from your experience, right, anything that you would like to share with the audience in terms of maybe some difficulties, right, that you face when we talk about data and the whole concept?
Sure. So just to set it right, Swiggy is based on cloud. Like if cloud computing didn't exist, then as a company, we will not exist, right? So it's all about all kinds of data ingestion, batch, API, real streaming, and it's all about, and it's at different levels as well, whether it is consumer, driver, restaurant. So there are multiple apps, multiple exchanges of data happening every minute, second, all of that. And also, I'm hoping there are many consumers here, so you would understand that latency in the app is just not appreciated at all, right? So it's like, oh, it took me 5 seconds in fact, we have these. How many seconds did the payment page take to load? and it actually impacts our conversion. So for us, this infrastructure is the backbone or the company itself, if I may say so, and it has to run all seamlessly. The major challenges we face is that hundreds of models, integrations in the app at the back end, and that exchange is also happening, terabytes of data every second. Every few hours, the data is being analyzed, fed back into the app, because it depends on if you place 3 orders today, the second order learns from the first, and the third order learns from the first, second, and the previous, right? So it's like that, and the challenge is running all this efficiently, of course. So the cost is actually a big angle for us. However, it's also said that the cost is fraction of what it used to be, and so on and so forth. But the scale at which we are running, we cannot have unused instances running. We cannot have unoptimized analyses happening. We have Snowflake partner here. I think the only demand we have from Snowflake is how do we optimize our cost, query cost, because all our schedules which go on the platform are reviewed twice before they're actually scheduled for costs. So I think the cost is a big lever for us. It's been one of so you have L0 goals in our company. So one of them is profitability, and another one of them is tech cost. So imagine the size of it, right? So I think that is number one. Number two is also finding people who can actually work with this infrastructure. This is not a talent which is very easily available. They should have knowledge about it, then they should keep themselves updated, and also be able to democratize it to the rest of the organization, which may not understand it very clearly. So that is another thing. With everything new coming in, right? So for example, we used to do only Snowflake, and then we started becoming big on Databricks and everything. And then how do we make sure that we understand it to code it efficiently? And then our data engineers will build wrappers on top of it. and then we as analysts and data scientists understand what wrappers did they build, and now how the data is flowing in, and do we need to learn something else? So yeah, I think that's a constant challenge of understanding, learning, delivering. And the third thing is, I think, security. Everybody has been talking about it. Being a new age company, anyways, these controls take some time to come. Yeah. There is role-based access, but then we want it to be, how many roles do you create in a company, right? So that's another thing we are struggling with.
Okay.
Then very recently we launched a co-branded credit card with HDFC, and then HDFC came up with their own guidelines, and that is when we understood what does security really mean, right? We were very happy with role-based security and some masking PII data, and then we were like, oh, there is a different
ballgame
altogether. And so I have happened to work in a financial services before.
Right.
So I did understand, and also GDPR and all of that. So I understand the importance of it. But a lot of people who just grew their career in startups, they don't. Because it's startup, right? So basic access is enough, right? Yeah. So I've famously always make a joke about this, that one of my analysts was actually explaining our InfoSec head that how can you sideline the security angle and still give and I'm like, dude, because he's like, no, we don't need it for we can manage it, and I'm like, okay, he just doesn't get it because he's just 2 years into the job, and
right.
And customer experience comes first for us.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happens is we're always about customer experience, and everything else is sort of takes a backseat. So yeah, I think those are some of the things I wanted
Yep.
to say.
Thanks for those. I think the Jugalbandi of Swiggy and Snowflake is really helping us, your customers, get orders on time and getting good recommendations out as well. I think great insights, right? We talked about various challenges. I think security is a core to everything. And that's where, Malavika, I would want to touch upon with you, right? So while we talk about security, right? And currently all the discussions that we have is basically on everything on data, right? And we know Snowflake, right, the hottest property on the market as of now. So when we talk about security, right, and data, how do you see enterprises probably having maybe a playbook around it, right? How do you make it secure? How do you ensure that everything is governed properly, right? And basically addressing some of the challenges that we have around the security notion, right? So would love to hear from you about maybe some good or best practices, right, around data and security, how you can basically get it enabled.
Sure, thanks. So let me start off by saying thanks so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure to see such a full room and such a fantastic audience here today. So you're right, security is job number one for us always at Snowflake, right? Our customers trust us with their data, and they trust us to ensure that no one can actually misuse or wrongly access that kind of data. So our protocol is always to ensure that data in transit or at rest is immediately encrypted. Anything that enters into Snowflake is encrypted as it enters, right?
Okay.
It's the way that we operate. But I think it's not just that these are passive methods of ensuring security, right? Security is an active, ongoing process. It's something that we have to manage on a regular basis, right? So when we look at where the data is coming from, who is actually getting access to the data at the source, who are the people who are designated within our customer organizations as the data stewards or the data security guys, and from our side, how is it that we are ensuring that this platform is secure enough? It's a joint job is what I'm trying to say here. It's not something which you can do in isolation. You have to ensure that this is something where both are collaborating and ensuring that yes, you're getting the assurance whatever data you're giving to us is going to be secure, and on the way that how it got there, that also was secure, right? So to that point, I think a lot of us have this terrible habit, come on, yeah, just give me your password and details. I just want to log in right now and I'll change it later. This is actually a very wrong thing, right? Because a lot of people, these are famous last words. Okay, I'll change it later. And when does it really happen, right? So this is what hackers are looking at. They're looking for any vulnerability in the system. And this is the place where they start, right? So what we are doing now is that we used to earlier offer and suggest and exhort our customers that, look, you need to actually ensure that you're using multi-factor authentication, right? In our case in India, our government does it for us, right? Like they ensure that you have two-factor authentication everywhere. You don't have a choice. But we used to politely and gently suggest, then we started exhorting them. But now I think we have also started moving towards where in a few, I think in the next couple of quarters, we are going to ensure that multi-factor authentication is the de facto standard for everything that's happening on Snowflake, right? Because that's the only way that we can be very sure that there is no threat or there is no threat actor or harmful person trying to take the data out of the platform. Right. That's how we are looking at it. We also have a very comprehensive security perspective, which is Snowflake Horizon. And I would definitely, encourage people to look at the 5 pillars of how we are ensuring that this data is secure. This is something that you can go and explore yourself as well later. I'm not going to go into details out here right now. But yeah, so this is how we are looking at cybersecurity as a holistic approach at Snowflake.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. And I think you have rightly pointed out many things, right? So one thing that we have also seen is how many companies are trying to make sure that things operate at an optimal pace. And we have heard a lot of our customers talking about things not working, things not integrating, right? So that's where many are exploring the whole open source ocean, right? So when we talk about open source, is it, Mitch, your thoughts, right? How does it really help bridge the gap, right? In terms of probably getting things to interoperate, right? So any thoughts around that? Would it probably help as we move in the future, or customers can probably leverage open source to probably fill in some gaps? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I think open source is, I think it's a two-faced coin, right? When I say open source, a lot of customers like hearing the word open source because they are cost sensitive. They tend to think open source equal to free. It's not true. And once they get into that, then they realize what a big con that was. Okay. So by the time, of course, it's maybe a little too late to do things, but the way that I would suggest customers look at open source, right, is how open is this really? Who are the people who are actually the collaborators of that open source object that you are looking at, right? For example, earlier this year during our summit, we spoke about how we have looked at iceberg tables. A lot of our customers had data on iceberg tables and they wanted to be able to use that data along with their other data which is already present in Snowflake. So that's one of the use cases is to look at external data. The other is where we offer you the ability to use iceberg tables within Snowflake to store your data. And how this works is that iceberg is a de facto standard in the industry to be able to ensure interoperability and intercommunication between data across any customers. It's like a standard, so you don't have to worry about it that I have to convert the data or I have to take another hop, skip and jump and add latency or add cost to be able to do that.
Right.
So that was one of the things that we have started offering our customers. In addition to that, we also have worked on the Polaris catalog. That was another announcement that came out at Summit. And the Polaris catalog is actually our own commitment to the open source community, right? We are in the collaborating board of the of the Polaris catalog, and we encourage our customers to really look at all the other catalogs that are supposed to be quote unquote open source, right? How open are they? When you go and look at the board of people who are collaborating to those platforms, you realize that there is just probably one or two people who are having a vested interest in keeping this open. And that's where, you don't have the flexibility to allow third parties to enter and actually be able to collaborate on, contribute towards the development of that standard.
Right,
and that's where you really need to start digging and questioning that how open is this really? From the edge and the cloud perspective, I think you have to look at what is it that I need to absolutely have at the edge, right? You cannot keep that as a very heavy kind of a thing.
Right.
And then you have to look at, okay, where is it that my use cases are going to get me the most bang for my buck?
Right.
And therefore what I can move to the cloud, right? Because cloud is always going to give you scale.
Yeah.
And just like Swiggy, we were born in the cloud, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. So over there, you also have to look at what does interoperability really mean to you? Do you need it at the edge level, or do you need to have it at a level of abstraction, which is probably where your data was transferred from the edge to another device, and therefore it went into the cloud or wherever it is that you're doing another level of processing on it. So that's where you should think about your architecture, about the cost benefit that you're looking for, and how is this going to scale in the long term in terms of what you're really trying to do as an organization. So that's the way that I would think you should look at it.
Wonderful. Bejoy, you want to add on top of it?
Yeah, I think to me, the whole open source community, like you rightly said, is a two-sided coin. For me, it's a double-edged sword. One thing is, everybody sees it as a way to bring in new projects into your solution, but the economics that's tied to it, how does the support system work around it, right? Take Red Hat as a company. They got acquired for, close to $100 billion. What was their model? They were operating open source, but then there was a support model behind it, which was actually sold. That's really where they were making the money. And the other part to it is open source, especially when it comes to security challenges, right? When you have a huge community of people coming in, it's hard to control where all these contributions are coming from, especially when you're talking about, is some part of it coming from China as an example? Is there rogue code that's inserted in the system? And who's responsible at the end for identifying that rogue code that could have been inserted by a malicious person or a malicious country? And who's going to be responsible ultimately for a system that's deployed using that open source code? So the whole model, how it can get productized and used eventually for any use case, I think that's the biggest challenge. But at the same time, it opens up a wide variety of use cases in different sectors. Just taking as an example, since this topic is edge here, you have just so many different bodies that's doing edge. There's Linux Foundation that's got edge computing, which is merged with edge computing from other organizations. I can't even keep track of how many organizations merge in this space. But there's so many open source communities. And then vendor specific, like Dell as an example, had the whole EdgeX Foundry initiative, right? So being able to contribute and figuring out as an enterprise, where do I even start playing in this space, right? Ultimately, you have to have a product. None of these enterprises, unless you're like, the Fortune 10 companies that have the scale to build a product using an open source community. Everybody else is going to rely on another vendor. And to the vendor, if he's just delivering an open source product, he has to make money ultimately, and there the support thing comes in. And unless it's a hardened system, nobody will deploy it to serve like customers. It's good for innovation, but there needs to be a way to eventually mature that and get it to the market.
Right. Agree. Yeah.
So I think in some of the customers, where we have seen is if they want to create an MVP or a POC, they go with a open source model first, see the viability of how the product works, and then as they are doing that, finally figure out, hey, which platform do we go eventually, right? So again, depends on again whether the customer want to build or buy, right? So if they want to, again, these are very, very large topics, but then if they want to kind of eventually build, definitely the POC or the MVP might be using the open source, but then they eventually want to look at security, they want to look at scalability, they want to look at how a long-term support, etc. So eventually they will definitely go for a more robust product is what we have seen, at least in the enterprise space.
Okay, got it. So I think lastly, probably we talk about edge, the applicability, the use cases, the underlying infrastructure, right? But then we know for sure that in order to make it a success, we need those skills, right? It could be around alignment with your business. And then we have the whole talent skills, right? Taking into account people who are building these things up, right? So when we talk about the skills or whatever strategies are required, right, to move into the future and build probably the next gen edge AI infrastructure, right? What are the things that you believe are necessary to you, right? So.
Look, again, there are a plethora of options available, right? If you want to buy a car, you can go buy a Maruti or you can go buy a Mercedes, right? So in a edge and a multi-cloud space, right? I mean, if you're looking at a real enterprise kind of system, it is like everything available on a pane of glass, which means that what does it mean, right? Initially, you need all these IoT devices that are installed, that gets connected to the edge, correct? The edge gets connected to the cloud, correct? And then there are applications running on the cloud, which manages the entire end to end, right? So again, how do you kind of, let us say, like Bangalore, there are so many cameras installed across, like one camera fails, what happens? It fails.
Yeah.
Right? But now, if we have a pane of glass where you are able to kind of go see how each of these are performing, on a click of a button, you are saying that this is kind of dysfunctioning as of morning 6 o'clock, and there is a process where you can go and quickly go fix it. Right. So then that is the highest level of, again, for skills for that is very, very different than, the skills for a lower level of adoption. Again, it all depends on where enterprises want to be. If there is also cost of quality involved. Correct. So depending on what, you basically look at what skills. Right. But then right from the top end, we will look at, how do you kind of create this environment, have automation, have pipelines, have CI/CD, have blue-green deployments. The entire plethora of technology can be used to kind of build these systems. Correct. But then skill-wise, again, right from, managing the devices to installing the infrastructure, installing the edge devices, again, managing the cloud. Again, it can be a multi-cloud environment, right? Depending on the workload of which cloud to go, correct? All these are, if and else conditions, depending on the particular use case, you go choose the option that the customer wants and the money they are ready to pay.
Got it.
That's the way I look at it.
Got it. Thank you. Ishu, probably anything in the future skill set, what's required to basically foray and succeed in the space?
So I think wanted to add that even though these are managed services, because you go for build services, managed services, there's still a lot of contextualization needed. Because you just can't use them as they are. And they need, and there'll always be a need to integrate with some open source, some, how many warehouses at what levels, which level of security at which level. Something is becoming obsolete because now our use cases have become different. Like LLM came in, right? And then suddenly In fact, we tried not from an infra perspective, but use cases perspective. Something works, something doesn't work, and then you realize, oh, you need this, and this is a paid thing. And so I think what we need is people who have strong foundations, which is whatever skill set is needed today. Like, for example, today I tell my analysts, because I probably consume this infra versus more build this infra, that you have to be an open mind to learn all of this and understand it from a usage perspective.
Right.
So today, more than insights, if we want to train our people on data engineering. We want them to understand the various components of the infra. We want to understand how data itself is flowing through it and why we have chosen certain components and all of that. So I think in future, what is becoming more and more important is to understand what brings that data to you.
Okay.
How it is and how can it scale up and down depending on, I mean, we are an event-based company as well, right? So there are events which happen where the infra scales down.
Right.
Why we can't do certain things, because just because we use that infra doesn't mean we can abuse it.
Right.
Right. So that understanding is probably, at least from my standpoint, I think Bejoy, Malavika and others can probably more comment on the core data engineering or cloud and skill set. But my perspective is from a consumer of this infra, that we need to understand it, and people who understand it do a lot better. Their ML models, their insights, their real-time metrics, everything becomes a lot better, faster, versus the ones who don't.
Exactly.
So I think that it's going to be important to understand this, learn it, and have an open mind to learn.
Open mind to, right. Malavika, your thoughts, next gen capability, skill sets.
I'm glad you asked me that question, because I'm actually hiring right now, and
oh, nice.
I ask myself this question every day, So I think, as Ishu said, right, like rightly, data engineering is the core, right? That we are a data company, and our evolution over the last couple of years into the AI data cloud has really changed how we work with our customers, with our partners, and our other stakeholders, right? We actually have a lot of partners who are customers and vice versa, and we also have a 360-degree relationship in a lot of those cases. What this does is that today we have customers who want to build apps on Snowflake, right? And what they want to do is they want to be able to list it on marketplace, offer it to other customers, and they each bring in their own technology stack. So if you can imagine the ability to be able to deal with this uncertainty, learn really fast, pick up technologies quickly, you have to have a solid foundation in order to be able to do that, right?
Absolutely.
And ability to think out of the box, experiment, and not be afraid to fail. So this is what I would look at as from a technology perspective. And my message would be that think of yourself as the product. You need to have skills such that people would want to pay the price that you're looking for in the market. That's a mindset that you need to have in today's days.
Very rightly said. Bejoy, over to you. Your thoughts.
I think as every revolution happens, right? If you look at before the industrial revolution we've been talking about, people used to work 15, 16 hours. Now you could be a lot more efficient because there's going to be technology advancement. So you have to be a constant learner. You have to be able to go across sectors. You have to be able to learn new technologies, because that piece is not going to be stagnant. Just like every company who has stayed stagnant, be it Xerox, as an industry, some other disruptor will come in and disrupt your market, right? You could be the market leader one day, but doesn't mean that you're going to be that leader forever. So as a company, you need to learn. As employees within the company, you need to constantly retrain them across new technologies. And I'll just talk from the telco sector, which is where I'm coming from. I mean, this is a sector which is, gets hundreds of billions of spend every year, consumes huge amount of data. But if you look at the employee base there, mostly among the operator community, like within Indian market or any market, right? There's a lot of people who have had a lot of tenure, who has been in the industry for a long time. And to them, first, the organization is also structured differently, where you have people who do just operations, who do just network engineering. That also is changing with cloud, because cloud earlier was just the IT team, which used to deal with it. Now you have the network folks. So people are having to cross-train and learn new techniques. And that would evolve further now. We're just in the fourth wave of AI revolution, right? You'll start to see more sentient AI. And eventually, when you take about 6G, it's more of a cobot. It's where you have humans interacting a lot more with robots. And in that sort of environment, if your skill sets are not aligned with it, I mean, people were talking about seeing a funny ad the other day where people were talking about Elon Musk was saying, there wouldn't be anybody driving the cars 3 years from now. And there was somebody else saying there would be all these remote autonomous cars. So, but see where we are 6 years out. There's still a role for humans. And as long as that interaction with the AI, which is also evolving rapidly, and people's skill sets evolve with it, you would still have a more intelligent world where people still have a huge role to play. And that would only evolve with skill sets.
Absolutely. I think that's a great takeaway from all of you. Thank you so much. I just want to do a quick time check. How much time we have? Okay, out of time, right? So can we take 1 or 2 questions from the audience?
Sure, I think we can take one.
Okay.
One person is itching to ask a question.
I was sincerely hoping.
Could you check the mic, please?
I was sincerely hoping this question would have been asked to Ishu, right? Swiggy as a company that I see, to do justice to this topic, edge and cloud, we have all kind of mobile phones, right? From different operating system, different, kind of network connectivity, the capabilities of the phone. So how you took the judgment on this capability would be on the handset at the edge, whereas this capability would be on the cloud when you try to roll out a capability or a use case, right? That's part A of my question. Part B, to do justice to the second part of the topic, architecting for the next generation. If you were to look at the same problem at Swiggy today, how would you reimagine it?
So actually, I'm not the right person to answer this. I think I will have to get a brain check for that. Because like I said, I consume the infrastructure and I understand the issues, etc., but not like how I would reimagine the infrastructure for that. Yeah, I'll be very honest.
Yeah, I think it was great talking to all of you. I didn't even realize when we were out of time, fell just 5 minutes. So thank you so much for the wonderful insights. It was really a pleasure speaking. Thank you everyone for joining in. If you have any questions, please drop us an email. We'll try to get the answers from our panel members, right? Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day ahead. Thank you. Yeah.